Sarah Collins dusted the expansive shelves of Jack Thompson's library, a room that seemed more like a private museum than a reading space. Gleaming mahogany shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each one filled with books that looked as if they had never been touched. She moved carefully, wiping down each surface and occasionally straightening a misplaced object. As she reached for a stack of papers on the desk, her hand paused. Among the documents, she noticed a few that seemed out of place: technical diagrams, legal contracts, and what looked like schematics for financial transactions. Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on why they felt unusual, but something about them set off alarm bells in her mind. She glanced around, the quiet of the room suddenly pressing on her. The papers were mixed with other documents, as though hastily placed there, yet they seemed to form a distinct pile. With a slight frown, she adjusted the stack to its original position, yet her curiosity lingered. The mansion was no stranger to wealth and power, but the thought that Jack Thompson might be involved in something shady wasn't one Sarah had entertained. Still, there it was, the gnawing suspicion that something here didn't quite add up. Later in the afternoon, while Sarah was vacuuming the grand hall outside the library, Jack appeared at the end of the corridor, his stride purposeful. She tensed for a moment, unsure of how to broach the subject. Jack, tall and immaculately dressed, carried himself with the air of someone who rarely faced opposition. When he approached her, his expression softened slightly, and he nodded in acknowledgement. "Good afternoon, Sarah," he said, with a hint of warmth, rare for a man who seldom engaged in small talk. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson," she replied, her voice steady but her mind racing. She hesitated, but something urged her to speak up. "Mr. Thompson, I came across some documents in the library today. They looked important, but also a bit unusual. I thought you might want to know." Jack's demeanor shifted subtly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. He managed a smile, but Sarah sensed a flicker of concern behind his otherwise calm facade. "Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Sarah. I'll take a look at them myself." Her heart pounded as he turned to walk away, and she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The words had slipped out before she'd fully considered the consequences. As she continued her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something much larger than herself. That evening, Jack returned to the library, his brow furrowed as he sifted through the stack of documents Sarah had mentioned. He didn't let on much, but Sarah noticed the quiet tension in his movements. He scanned each paper, his eyes growing darker with each page he flipped. When he finally looked up, he noticed her hovering nearby, as if waiting for reassurance. "Sarah," he began, his tone more serious than she had ever heard before. "I'll have my team look into these documents. It's likely nothing, but we can't be too careful." He offered a faint smile, but there was an edge to it that made Sarah uneasy. She nodded, pretending to accept his explanation, though she could tell that something wasn't right. There was a slight tremor in Jack's hand as he placed the documents back on the desk, and his gaze lingered on them, almost as if they held a secret he wasn't ready to face. As she finished her tasks and left the library, Sarah couldn't help but feel she had unlocked a door that perhaps should have remained closed. She sensed that the world she was about to enter was one filled with shadows and secrets, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the unmistakable hum of an aircraft outside her modest apartment building. Pulling back the curtains, she was stunned to see a sleek private jet parked on the small airstrip adjacent to her complex, a strange sight in her otherwise quiet neighborhood. Moments later, Jack Thompson stepped out, looking as out of place as the jet itself, yet perfectly composed. He glanced up, seemingly knowing which window she'd be looking out of, and waved her down. Heart pounding, Sarah quickly threw on her coat and hurried outside, the crisp morning air bracing against her skin. Jack met her with a slight smile, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and something else she couldn't quite place. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted her, his tone casual as if this were a normal occurrence. "I thought it might be nice for us to have a chat over breakfast." She blinked, momentarily speechless. "I, Mr. Thompson, I wasn't expecting this," he chuckled, gesturing toward the jet. "I'd like to discuss something important with you, and I thought a change of scenery might help." He paused, his gaze steady. "There's also something I want to offer you, a way to move beyond what you might have seen yesterday." Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, Sarah accepted his invitation, climbing aboard the jet with a mixture of excitement and nerves. As they took off, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to make a decision that would alter her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Seated across from Jack in the luxurious cabin, Sarah barely touched her coffee, her eyes flickering between him and the clouds stretching across the horizon. Jack watched her carefully, his expression unreadable as he leaned back, fingers tapping lightly against his glass. "I'm a straightforward man, Sarah," he began, his voice soft yet commanding. "And I believe in rewarding loyalty. You've done excellent work for me, but I'm aware of the position you're in now. I want to offer you a choice." He slid a thick envelope across the table toward her. She hesitated, reaching out to take it. When she opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a stack of cash, far more than she'd ever seen in one place. "In exchange for your discretion regarding those documents," he continued, "I'm prepared to make this worth your while. You'll never have to worry about money again if you agree to keep this between us." Sarah swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true. But there was something else in his gaze, a flicker of sincerity that made her hesitate. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thompson," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "But I'm not just looking for money. I'd like to know more about what I found and why it matters so much." A smile tugged at the corner of Jack's mouth. He seemed almost pleased by her response. "Then I have another offer," he said, leaning forward. "There's a position open at one of my companies. You'd be working directly with me, learning the ropes and gaining insights into the kind of world most people only dream of. You'd be in a place where you could make a real difference and maybe find the answers you're looking for." They landed back in the city shortly afterward, and as they stepped off the jet, Jack's words echoed in Sarah's mind. The idea of working with him, stepping into a world far removed from the life she had known, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had no experience in business, no real understanding of what her role would be. But the opportunity dangled before her like a prize, just out of reach. Later that day, Jack brought her to his office, a sleek, high-rise building in the heart of downtown. As they walked through the polished marble halls, he outlined the basics of the position, a role as his assistant, with access to confidential files and the chance to witness the inner workings of his empire. "You'll learn fast, Sarah. I have no doubt about that," he assured her, his tone almost warm. "It won't be easy, but you'll find that challenges bring out the best in people." She looked around, taking in the bustling office space filled with people in tailored suits, each one moving with purpose. It was a world she had only seen from a distance, one she never imagined she'd be a part of. Yet, here she was, about to step into it, propelled by a mixture of curiosity and a nagging feeling that something monumental awaited her. As they made their way to his private office, Jack stopped, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Think about it carefully," he said, his tone serious once again. "Once you're in, there's no going back. You'll be a part of my world for better or worse." Sarah nodded, her decision already forming in her mind. She didn't fully trust Jack, but the chance to change her life and perhaps uncover the truth about the documents she'd seen was too compelling to pass up. She was ready to take the plunge, no matter where it might lead. Sarah's first day at the company was a whirlwind. She arrived dressed in the best clothes she could afford, still feeling out of place among the well-tailored suits and designer dresses. The staff bustled around her, each person seemingly glued to their phones or laptops, engrossed in conversations about deals and projects that were beyond her understanding. As Jack's new assistant, she was given a spacious desk right outside his office, a spot that allowed her to observe everything that went on. Her responsibilities were simple at first: organizing his schedule, taking calls, and handling his email. Yet she soon realized that this position wasn't just a typical assistant job. Jack gave her access to files filled with complex financial information, reports on various investments, and documents detailing deals with powerful clients. As she studied these papers, her mind raced, trying to make sense of this new world she'd entered. She felt like an outsider looking in, but a part of her was fascinated by the fast-paced environment, the scent of ambition and power that seemed to permeate every corner of the office. By the end of the day, Sarah was exhausted but determined. She knew this role was more than just a job. It was a chance to learn, to prove herself, and maybe even to find the answers she sought. She glanced around the office, noticing how many of her new colleagues eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, as though they wondered how she, a former cleaner, had landed this coveted position. That evening, she met with Clara, her best friend, at a cozy cafe they frequented. Clara listened intently as Sarah recounted the events of the day, her eyes wide with amazement and a hint of envy. "This is your big break, Sarah," Clara said, leaning forward eagerly. "You deserve this chance. I mean, how many people get to work directly with someone like Jack Thompson? You've got to go for it." Sarah smiled, but her expression was tinged with guilt. "I know, Clara, but it feels strange, like I'm leaving behind everything I've known. I mean, I'm not exactly one of them." Clara squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You've spent years working hard, putting up with people who didn't appreciate you. Now you have a chance to be someone else, to do something more. Don't let self-doubt hold you back." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew Clara was right, but part of her couldn't shake the feeling that by stepping into this new world, she was betraying her old one. She felt torn between the loyalty to her past and the lure of an uncertain but promising future. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this decision wasn't just about a job. It was about choosing who she wanted to become. That Friday, Jack invited Sarah to her first high society event, a glamorous charity gala at a 5-star hotel downtown. She borrowed a dress from Clara, a long, elegant gown that made her feel like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Yet, as she entered the grand ballroom, Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The guests, dressed in designer attire and dripping with jewels, cast sidelong glances her way, some polite, others appraising. Jack greeted her with a warm smile, extending his arm as he led her deeper into the crowd. She clung to his side, feeling like an imposter among these people who sipped champagne and discussed million-dollar deals as casually as the weather. Yet she couldn't deny the allure of it all: the glittering chandeliers, the clinking of glasses, the hum of laughter and conversation that filled the room. As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed that some guests eyed her with open curiosity, their gazes lingering a little too long. Others seemed almost resentful, as though her presence was an intrusion on their exclusive world. She overheard snippets of whispered conversations, words like "new assistant" and "from the cleaning staff," that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. At one point, a woman in an emerald green dress approached her, flashing a saccharine smile. "So, you're Jack's latest project, I presume? I've seen quite a few assistants come and go. I wonder how long you'll last." Sarah forced a smile, holding her ground. "I'm here to learn," she replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. The woman's smile faltered slightly, and she quickly excused herself, leaving Sarah with a strange sense of satisfaction. Despite the skepticism, the doubts, and the murmured judgments, Sarah realized that she wanted to prove herself. This world might be foreign, even hostile, but she was determined to find her place in it, no matter the cost. A few weeks into her new role, Sarah started noticing an unsettling presence around the office. One afternoon, as she returned to her desk from a meeting, she found a man waiting in the hallway. He wore a tailored suit and had a calculating look in his eyes that made her instantly wary. He introduced himself as Lucas Harper, a business rival of Jack's, though he seemed too comfortable in Jack's territory. "Ah, so you're Sarah," Lucas said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard quite a bit about you." Sarah tried to remain polite, but her instincts warned her that Lucas wasn't there for small talk. "I'm just Jack's assistant. I'm not sure what you've heard, but I'm fairly new." Lucas chuckled, his gaze cold and assessing. "Yes, I can see that. But new or not, you're already caught up in some interesting matters, aren't you?" He leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Be careful, Sarah. In this world, alliances can shift like the wind, and sometimes people who don't belong end up, well, let's just say they don't last long." He straightened, giving her a knowing look before he strode away, leaving her with a chill that lingered long after he'd gone. She realized with a sinking feeling that Lucas wasn't just issuing a casual warning. He was marking her as a potential threat, and she wasn't sure why. When she told Jack about the encounter, he seemed uncharacteristically tense. He brushed it off initially, saying Lucas had a habit of stirring up trouble, but Sarah sensed a deeper concern in his voice. "Don't let him get to you, Sarah," Jack said, pacing in his office. "Lucas enjoys playing games. He's constantly trying to undermine me, and now he's trying to get under your skin. It's his way of getting close to those I trust." Sarah crossed her arms, meeting Jack's gaze with determination. "I understand, but this is more than just games, isn't it? You're involved in something that's making enemies, and I need to know what I'm getting into." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair, a rare crack in his polished facade. "You're right," he admitted, his voice lower. "There are things happening behind the scenes that aren't exactly legal. But understand this, Sarah. Whatever risks you think you're taking, I'm doing my best to protect you. I wouldn't let anything happen to you." His words should have reassured her, but instead, they filled her with a strange mixture of trust and fear. She felt herself drawn to him, yet she couldn't ignore the suspicion growing in her heart. Jack's reassurances weren't enough. She needed to find out the truth for herself. Driven by her growing unease, Sarah began her own investigation. Late one night, after everyone had left the office, she snuck into Jack's private study, hoping to find answers. She rummaged through drawers and cabinets, her pulse racing as she scanned document after document. Finally, she found what she'd been searching for, a file marked with Lucas's name, along with several others she didn't recognize. The contents were a jumbled mess of financial records, contracts, and what looked like records of clandestine meetings. She read through them quickly, piecing together fragments of a complex web of shady business dealings and backroom agreements. Jack wasn't just involved in high-stakes finance. He was tangled in a network of corruption that went far beyond anything she'd imagined. As she closed the file, she felt a surge of fear and excitement. She wasn't just an outsider caught in a dangerous game. She was now part of it, whether she liked it or not. And while the risks were high, so was the chance to expose the truth. She resolved to continue her investigation, even if it meant keeping secrets from Jack, who had clearly been keeping plenty from her. She left the study that night with a sense of purpose, determined to uncover whatever Jack was hiding. But as she walked out, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, lurking in the shadows. She was now on a path with no return, and she had no choice but to see it through to the end. Not long after Sarah's midnight search, strange messages began appearing in her life. It started with an envelope slipped under her apartment door one morning. Inside was a note, written in neat, precise handwriting. "Someone is watching you. Be careful what you uncover." Sarah's heart pounded as she read the message, feeling an icy wave of fear wash over her. She checked the hallway, but no one was there. The silence of the early morning only amplified her unease. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming. Some arrived as emails from anonymous addresses, while others were texts that vanished after a few moments. Each message warned her to stop digging, hinting that whoever was behind them had eyes everywhere. Sarah began to feel as if she were being followed, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling every time she left work or walked home at night. She wondered if it was Lucas trying to intimidate her, or if Jack had his own ways of keeping tabs on her. Despite the fear creeping into her daily life, Sarah's resolve only grew. She was determined to continue her investigation, even as the danger closed in around her. She couldn't let herself be silenced, not now that she was so close to uncovering the truth. One evening, Jack arrived unexpectedly at her apartment, concern etched on his face. He held one of the anonymous notes she had received, its contents apparently forwarded to him somehow. His usual calm was gone, replaced by an intensity that took Sarah by surprise. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" he demanded, his voice rising in frustration. "These messages aren't threats to be taken lightly, Sarah. Whoever's behind them could be serious." She looked away, gathering her thoughts before responding. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure if I could trust you, Jack. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't even know if you're telling me the truth." Jack's expression softened, but his eyes were still hard, his jaw clenched. "You can trust me, Sarah. I brought you into this world, and I'll protect you from it. But you have to let me in. If there's something you need to know, I'll tell you. But you need to be honest with me too." Sarah felt the weight of her emotions crashing down, her frustration and fear bubbling to the surface. "I just want to know the truth, Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to know what's really going on, because right now, I feel like I'm in the dark, and these threats, they're not helping." Jack reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. I'll make sure nothing happens to you, Sarah. But if you're going to keep investigating, you're putting yourself in danger." His words left her conflicted. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust that he would protect her. But another part of her, the part that had seen too much already, wondered if he was just another piece of the puzzle she needed to solve. That night, as they sat together in her small living room, Sarah let her guard down, sharing her deepest fears with Jack. She spoke of her growing distrust, of the constant tension she felt, and the doubts that gnawed at her. Jack listened intently, his face unreadable, his expression softened by the shadows that flickered across the room. "I understand why you're afraid," he said quietly. "I've done things I'm not proud of, and I've been involved in business that's far from clean. But my intentions with you have always been honest, Sarah. I want you to succeed, to have a life that you deserve. I wouldn't bring you into this world if I didn't believe you could handle it." His words brought a sense of comfort, but they didn't erase the fear that clung to her. She searched his eyes, looking for the truth beneath his polished exterior, hoping for a glimpse of the real Jack Thompson. But just as she began to feel a sliver of trust, he pulled away, his expression growing distant. "There are things I can't tell you, not yet," he added, his voice barely a whisper. "Not because I don't want to, but because I need to protect you. Some secrets are better left hidden." Sarah nodded, understanding, yet feeling frustrated all the same. The walls between them were still there, as solid as ever. She wanted to believe in him, to trust that he would help her navigate this treacherous path. But she knew that as long as secrets remained, she could never fully let her guard down. And as she watched him leave, she realized that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. That night, as she lay awake in bed, Sarah resolved to continue her search for the truth, even if it meant doing so without Jack's protection. She knew the risks were high, but she had come too far to turn back now. She was determined to expose whatever dark forces were at play, and she wouldn't stop until she found the answer she needed. Determined to follow her instincts, Sarah arranged a meeting with an anonymous informant who had contacted her. He claimed to have inside information about the network she had stumbled upon, and though Sarah was cautious, her curiosity overpowered her fear. They arranged to meet in a secluded cafe on the edge of town, a place far from prying eyes. When she arrived, she spotted him immediately, a man in his late 50s with a worn face and a sharp gaze. He introduced himself only as Mason. They sat across from each other in a quiet corner, his eyes flickering nervously as he glanced around the room. "You're brave to be digging into this, Sarah," he said in a low voice. "Most people in your position would have walked away by now, but I can tell you're different." Sarah leaned in, keeping her voice steady. "I need to know what's going on. I've seen things, heard things, and I've been getting messages, threats, warnings. I need answers, Mason. I need to understand what I've been pulled into." Mason nodded, his expression serious. "You're dealing with powerful people. Jack Thompson is one of them, but he's not the only one. There's a circle of businessmen and politicians, all tangled together in a web of corruption. They control assets, move money, and eliminate anyone who threatens their operations. And right now, you're getting too close." Sarah's pulse quickened as she listened, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had suspected something dark was at play, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through her. She knew that whatever she chose to do next would put her in even greater danger, but she couldn't back down now. The conversation grew more intense as Mason revealed details that made Sarah's blood run cold. He explained that Jack was being blackmailed by none other than Lucas Harper, his rival. Lucas had uncovered something damaging about Jack, a piece of leverage he used to keep Jack in check and maintain control over key business ventures. According to Mason, Jack had been forced into a corner, made to cooperate in illegal activities to avoid having his past exposed. "But here's the thing," Mason continued, his voice low. "Lucas doesn't just want to ruin Jack. He wants to take over. He's pushing Jack to the edge, hoping he'll make a mistake. And if you're caught in the middle, Lucas won't hesitate to use you as a pawn." Sarah's mind raced as she processed the information. "So Jack isn't just doing this by choice?" she asked. "He's being manipulated?" Mason nodded. "That's right, but that doesn't mean he's innocent either. He's gone along with it, made his share of profits, and if you're not careful, you'll be the next casualty in their game." She sat back, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. It was all more complicated than she'd anticipated. She had been looking for answers, but each revelation only led to more questions. She thanked Mason and left the cafe, feeling a mixture of dread and determination. She now understood that Jack wasn't just a player, he was a man caught in a deadly game, one that she was now inextricably tied to. Back at her apartment, Sarah sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance as she tried to make sense of everything. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one louder than the last. Jack was being blackmailed, forced to engage in illegal activities to keep his secrets buried. But what did that mean for her? How much danger was she really in, and could she trust Jack to protect her? A knock on her door snapped her out of her thoughts, and she opened it to find Jack standing there, his face drawn with worry. He had somehow sensed her inner turmoil, and she let him in, closing the door behind him. He stood in her living room, his eyes tired, his expression grave. "I know you met with someone today," he began, his voice soft. "I don't blame you for wanting answers, Sarah, but this is bigger than you realize. There are forces at play that you don't want to provoke." She met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. "I deserve to know the truth, Jack. I need to know what I'm dealing with if I'm going to protect myself." Jack hesitated, as though weighing how much he could reveal. "You've already seen too much," he said finally. "I was trying to keep you safe by keeping you out of it. But now, there's no turning back." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a file and placing it on the table between them. "This is everything I have on Lucas and his operations. If you want to help, if you're really willing to take that risk, then use this. But know that from this point on, you're part of the fight, and it won't be easy." Sarah looked down at the file, then back up at Jack. Her fear was still there, but so was a fierce determination. She had come too far to walk away now. With Jack by her side, she felt a strange sense of purpose, a drive to see this through, no matter what lay ahead. A week later, Sarah attended another event with Jack, this time a high-profile gala hosted at a luxury hotel. The room was filled with influential figures, each one draped in expensive attire and surrounded by an aura of privilege. Sarah had grown somewhat accustomed to these gatherings, but tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air that made her uneasy, and she soon realized why. Lucas was there, gliding through the crowd like a predator surveying his prey. When he spotted Jack, a sinister smile crept across his face, and he made his way over, his eyes briefly landing on Sarah. She felt her stomach tighten as he approached, exuding a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Jack, always a pleasure," Lucas greeted him, his voice dripping with insincerity. "And Sarah, looking as lovely as ever. I hear you've been quite the inquisitive little assistant." Jack's jaw clenched, but he forced a smile. "We're here to enjoy the evening, Lucas. Maybe tonight isn't the time to stir up trouble." Lucas raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Oh, I'm just here for the festivities. But I must say, Sarah, it's rare to find someone so enthusiastic about their work. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Curiosity has a way of getting people into trouble." His words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She managed a polite smile, but her heart was pounding. She glanced at Jack, who gave her a reassuring nod, but the tension between him and Lucas was unmistakable. She realized then that she wasn't the only one Lucas had set his sights on. Jack, too, was clearly in his crosshairs. As the evening wore on, Sarah watched Jack and Lucas engage in a quiet yet heated exchange across the room. She couldn't hear their words, but their body language spoke volumes. Jack's posture was tense, his fists clenched at his sides, while Lucas looked relaxed, almost taunting. Whatever was being said, it was clear that Lucas was pushing Jack to his limits. Suddenly, Jack turned and strode away, his face a mask of barely contained anger. Sarah followed him out onto a balcony, where he stood gripping the railing, breathing heavily. She approached cautiously, unsure whether to speak or wait for him to calm down. "He's trying to provoke me," Jack said, his voice low and strained. "He wants me to make a mistake, to react impulsively, but I won't give him that satisfaction." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "What did he say to you?" Jack shook his head, his gaze fixed on the city lights below. "He's threatening to expose certain details about my past, things I'd rather keep buried. But it's more than that. He's using you, Sarah. He thinks if he can get to you, he can control me. And I can't let that happen." She nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Then let's stop him. We have the information you gave me, and we can use it against him. I'm not afraid, Jack. If we work together, we can bring him down." Jack turned to face her, a look of surprise mingling with admiration. "You're stronger than I ever realized, Sarah. But this won't be easy. If we go after him, there's no turning back." Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. "I understand the risks. I've come too far to walk away now. Whatever it takes, I'm with you." Despite her bravado, Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of doubt as they returned to the gala. She kept her distance from Lucas, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were always on her, watching her every move, She had expected to be afraid, but what she hadn't anticipated was the sense of empowerment that came from standing beside Jack, facing the enemy together. As the night drew to a close, Lucas approached her again, this time alone. He flashed a charming smile, but she could see the malice lurking behind it. "You know, Sarah, Jack isn't the saint he pretends to be. He has his own skeletons, and I wonder if you really understand the kind of man you're protecting." She squared her shoulders, refusing to let him intimidate her. "I'm fully aware of who Jack is, and whatever his past, I believe in what we're doing now. You might think you have power over him, but that doesn't mean you have power over me." Lucas's smile faltered, and his eyes hardened. Bold words. But remember, loyalty is a dangerous game. People like Jack will only drag you down, and when they fall, they'll take you with them. Think carefully about where your loyalties lie, Sarah. With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her with a feeling of both dread and determination. She knew he was right about one thing. This was a dangerous game, one that could end badly for both her and Jack. But she had made her choice. She was in this fight to the end, and no matter what Lucas threw her way, she would stand her ground. Back at Jack's office, Sarah's curiosity grew bolder. She continued her search for answers, digging through his private files late one evening. Her instincts told her there was something Jack wasn't telling her, and she needed to find out what. That night, she stumbled upon a folder marked with a cryptic title, containing documents that seemed to link Jack to a major financial scandal involving shell companies and illegal offshore accounts. The documents were complex, filled with numbers and terms she didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear: Jack was deeply involved. As she skimmed the pages, her heart pounded, each new revelation more shocking than the last. It seemed Jack hadn't just been playing along with Lucas. He had orchestrated several of the deals himself, moving funds in ways that skirted the law and benefited his own interests. This wasn't just about survival. Jack had been making calculated decisions, some of which bordered on criminal. Sarah felt a surge of betrayal. She had come to trust Jack, to believe he was as much a victim as she was. But now she saw him in a new light, a man who had played both sides, willing to compromise his values for power. She closed the file, her mind racing with questions. She needed to confront Jack, but she also knew that this discovery put her in even greater danger. If anyone else knew she had this information, she could be in serious trouble. The next day, Sarah confronted Jack in his office, her emotions barely contained. She tossed the file onto his desk, watching as his face went pale, then hardened as he realized what she had uncovered. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "I trusted you, Jack. I thought we were in this together, but it turns out you've been playing me all along." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples as he closed his eyes. "Sarah, it's not what you think. Yes, I've done things I'm not proud of, but I had no choice. When you're dealing with people like Lucas, sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to survive." "That's no excuse," she shot back. "You've been lying to me from the start. I thought you wanted to take Lucas down, but it seems like you're no better than he is." Jack opened his eyes, a flash of pain crossing his face. "You have every right to be angry," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to find out like this, but you're in too deep now, and I need you to trust me. Lucas is planning something big, something that could ruin us both. If we're going to stop him, I need you by my side." Sarah hesitated, torn between her anger and a lingering sense of loyalty. She had seen the darkness in Jack, but she also knew the danger that Lucas posed. She could walk away, leave Jack to his fate, but something inside her wouldn't let her. She had committed herself to this fight, and no matter what Jack had done, she wasn't ready to abandon him. As the confrontation ended, Sarah stormed out of the office, desperate for a moment to clear her head. She hadn't gotten far when Lucas appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, blocking her path. He smiled, his expression smug, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "I told you Jack wasn't who you thought he was," Lucas said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "But I can offer you something he can't: freedom. Walk away from him, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. In fact, I can even give you information that will bring him down for good." Sarah crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes. "Why would you do that? What's in it for you?" Lucas chuckled, stepping closer. "Jack has been a thorn in my side for far too long. With you on my side, I can finally get rid of him once and for all. Think about it, Sarah. He's been using you, lying to you, and now you have the chance to turn the tables." She looked away, considering his words. Lucas's offer was tempting, but something about it felt wrong. She knew he had his own agenda, and she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting his help would come with a heavy price. But Lucas wasn't finished yet. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Just think about it. Jack's days are numbered, whether you help me or not. Align yourself with me, and you'll have nothing to fear. I'll protect you, make sure you're safe. All I need is your loyalty." Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She knew Lucas couldn't be trusted, but the path ahead with Jack was just as dangerous. She nodded slowly, pretending to consider his offer, even as she felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. As Lucas turned and walked away, she felt a surge of determination. She would continue to play her part, but she wouldn't let either of them control her. She was done being a pawn in their games. She would find her own way through the chaos, and no matter what it took, she would uncover the truth. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself torn between the two men. She knew Lucas couldn't be trusted, but Jack's betrayal still stung. In an effort to gain more clarity, she decided to follow Lucas's lead, hoping he might reveal something useful. She began tailing him discreetly, watching as he held clandestine meetings at odd hours and made calls from hidden corners of the city. One evening, she followed Lucas to an upscale restaurant, where he met with a group of well-dressed men and women, their demeanor cold and businesslike. Sarah slipped into a corner booth, close enough to overhear snatches of their conversation. They spoke in low voices about financial transactions, mentioning offshore accounts and coded language that hinted at illegal activity. Suddenly, she heard a name that made her blood run cold. Jack's name, spoken with a mixture of contempt and hostility. They were discussing how best to eliminate him, to sever his ties to the network they were building. It was clear that Lucas wanted Jack out of the way, permanently, and that he was willing to go to extreme lengths to make it happen. Sarah clenched her fists, her pulse racing as she listened. She realized that she had been right to be wary of Lucas. Whatever his promises, he was planning something much darker than she'd imagined, and she had unwittingly become part of his plot. She slipped out of the restaurant, determined to warn Jack, even if it meant putting herself at risk. The following day, Sarah confronted Lucas, hoping to extract more information. She played along, pretending to consider his offer of protection, all the while hoping he would let something slip. To her surprise, Lucas seemed eager to talk, almost as if he enjoyed the chance to boast about his plans. He led her to his office, a sleek, glass-walled space filled with expensive artwork and minimalistic furniture. Once inside, he revealed a detailed plan to take down Jack, outlining how he had been setting Jack up for months. He showed her documents that linked Jack to a web of fabricated evidence, all designed to implicate him in a massive financial scandal. "You see, Sarah," Lucas said, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "Jack thinks he can outsmart me, but I've been 2 steps ahead this entire time. Once the authorities get their hands on this evidence, he'll be finished. And with him out of the way, the company and everything else will be mine." As Lucas spoke, Sarah felt a cold realization settle over her. She had unwittingly walked into the lion's den, and now she had enough information to bring both of them down. But just as she was processing this, Lucas's tone grew more ominous. "And if you're thinking of double-crossing me, don't. I've made sure that anyone who betrays me faces consequences they won't soon forget." He leaned in, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "Think carefully, Sarah. You're either with me or you're against me. There's no middle ground." Sarah forced herself to smile, masking the fear that gripped her. She nodded, feigning agreement, all the while formulating a plan of her own. She knew now that she needed to warn Jack, but she would have to move quickly. Lucas was closer to executing his plan than she'd realized, and time was running out. That night, Sarah called Jack, hoping to reach him before it was too late. But when he answered, his voice was cold, distant. She could tell he didn't trust her, that he believed she might have aligned herself with Lucas. Frustrated, she tried to explain what she had discovered, but he cut her off. "You don't understand, Sarah," he said, his tone filled with resignation. "Lucas has already put his plan in motion. He's made it impossible for me to escape. And now, because of you, he has leverage he didn't have before." Sarah felt a pang of guilt, realizing that her actions had unwittingly pushed Jack closer to the edge, but she refused to give up. "Jack, listen to me. Lucas is setting you up, but he's also making himself vulnerable. I have proof that he's planning to destroy you, and if we act fast, we can turn the tables on him." Jack hesitated, his resolve wavering. "I don't know if I can trust you, Sarah. You've been playing both sides, and now you're asking me to risk everything on your word." She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not your enemy. I want to help you, Jack, and I want to see Lucas brought down just as much as you do. We still have a chance, but we have to work together." After a long silence, Jack finally relented. "All right, Sarah, I'll give you one last chance, but if you betray me, there won't be another. Meet me at the office tomorrow night, and we'll figure out our next move." Sarah agreed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead would be perilous, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. She had made her choice, and now she would see it through, no matter the cost. Lucas had set the stage for a final showdown, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to bring him down. As planned, Sarah arrived at the office late that night, the building eerily quiet and dimly lit. She had only been there a few minutes when the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. But it wasn't Jack. Two men she didn't recognize appeared, their faces hard and unsmiling. They moved toward her quickly, grabbing her by the arms before she could react. "Let me go," she shouted, struggling against their grip. But the men were unfazed, dragging her into a waiting van outside. As they drove away, she realized that Lucas had made his move. He must have discovered her plan with Jack and decided to eliminate her before she could pose a threat. Panic surged through her as she tried to think of a way to escape, but the men held her firmly, their expressions void of any sympathy. They brought her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, tying her to a chair in the center of a dimly lit room. Lucas appeared shortly afterward, his face twisted in a smug smile as he circled her, his voice dripping with mockery. "You should have known better, Sarah," he said, leaning in close. "Did you really think you could betray me and walk away unscathed? You've been a thorn in my side, and now it's time to remove you once and for all." Sarah glared at him, refusing to show fear. "You won't get away with this, Lucas. Jack knows what you're up to, and he won't stop until he brings you down." Lucas laughed, clearly amused. "Oh, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Jack's already on his way here, thinking he can save you. But what he doesn't know is that he's walking straight into a trap. By the time I'm finished, he'll be just as helpless as you are." A few minutes later, Jack arrived, his expression tense as he entered the warehouse, assessing the scene with a steely resolve. His gaze landed on Sarah, tied to the chair, and then moved to Lucas, who stood with a smug smile, clearly pleased with his handiwork. "Let her go, Lucas," Jack demanded, his voice calm but edged with anger. "This is between you and me. Leave her out of it." Lucas chuckled, crossing his arms as he took a step closer to Jack. "You're in no position to make demands. You're outnumbered, and as we speak, every piece of evidence points to you as the mastermind behind this entire operation. By tomorrow, you'll be in custody, your empire dismantled, and your reputation ruined. It's over, Jack." Jack's eyes flashed with determination. "You're wrong, Lucas. You've underestimated me, just like you underestimated Sarah. We're both willing to fight for what's right, and that's something you'll never understand." At that moment, Jack subtly signaled to Sarah, who noticed the small knife he slipped from his sleeve. She managed to grasp it, just as Lucas's attention shifted, and with a swift movement, she cut through the ropes binding her hands. In a heartbeat, she was free, lunging toward one of Lucas's men and knocking him off balance. Jack sprang into action, taking on the other guard, his movements quick and calculated. Chaos erupted as Sarah and Jack fought their way through Lucas's guards. In the scuffle, she grabbed the discarded files Lucas had left out, the proof they needed to expose his crimes. With one final blow, Jack incapacitated Lucas, leaving him dazed on the floor. They quickly made their escape, sprinting to Jack's car parked outside. Back in the car, Sarah glanced at Jack, her pulse racing as they sped away from the warehouse. She clutched the files tightly, realizing the power they held. But as they drove, Jack turned to her, a surprising calmness in his eyes. "There's something I need to tell you, Sarah," he began, his voice steady. "I didn't tell you everything because I had to protect this operation. I'm not just a businessman. I've been working undercover, gathering evidence to bring down people like Lucas. This whole scheme, it was a setup to dismantle his network from the inside out." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. "You mean, all of this, even the risks you took, were part of a plan?" Jack nodded. "I was recruited years ago by an agency investigating high-level corruption. I've been moving through different circles, uncovering operations, and Lucas was the final piece. I couldn't tell you because I didn't want you to be a target. But when you found those documents, I knew I had to bring you in. You're the only one I trusted to help me finish this." She took a deep breath, absorbing his words. The danger she had faced, the lies she had uncovered. It all made sense now. Jack had been playing a role, a dangerous game of deception, but he had done it to bring justice. Despite everything, he had stayed true to a cause she could finally understand. They drove to the agency headquarters, where Jack handed over the files. Agents swarmed, collecting evidence and beginning the process to bring down Lucas's entire operation. As they stood together, watching the scene unfold, Sarah felt a surge of relief and pride. She had helped expose a powerful criminal network, and though the road had been treacherous, she had emerged stronger. Jack turned to her, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "You could have walked away at any time, Sarah, but you didn't. I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, feeling a profound sense of closure. "I think we both found what we were looking for, Jack. The truth and a chance to make things right." As the dawn broke, they stood side by side, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing they had taken down a powerful enemy together. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt at peace, knowing she had chosen the right path, no matter how dark it had seemed along the way.